Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's webinar on frogs and toads of Southeastern Louisiana. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping rules. Please, everyone, mute your line. I've taken care of that on my end, but if you become unmuted, please mute yourself. You can use the chat box to ask any questions, and we'll be answering all questions at the end of the webinar. If you think of a question that wasn't answered, you can email it to education@nola.gov. And this webinar does not offer CEUs. The next voice you'll hear is our Assistant Director, Dr. Carrie Catone, who will be introducing today's speaker.
Thank you very much, Astacia. Yes, it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Mr. James Beck. He is one of our very talented pest control inspectors here at Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board, as well as a very, very talented taxonomist. He previously served as the general curator at the Zoo of Acadiana in Broussard, Louisiana, and worked on amphibian and bird ecology projects at the USGS National Wetlands Research Center in Lafayette, Louisiana. After years at the center, he served as an in-house biologist for the Lafayette Parish Bayou Vermilion District in Lafayette, working on aquatic habitat restoration projects. This project also involved a complete taxa index of the pond systems, identifying and in some cases, photographically documenting species. He continues to participate in amphibian and bird monitoring species here locally. All right, James, thank you very much for being our presenter today.
Thanks for the introduction, Carrie, and happy birthday to you. Glad to have you. All right, let's see now. Select my screen. Is everyone, y'all can see the screen?
Not yet.
Silence. Not yet? Boy, where'd it go? What about now?
No, I can't see it.
Okay, it was literally just up. What happened to it?
You're sharing your screen, correct?
Yeah. Now?
Okay, there it is. It's up.
All
Yes,
right,
James,
good. All right.
You're good to go.
Thank you much. All right, minor setback, but that always happens. Always. So frogs and toads of Southeast Louisiana will be the main focus here, with 32 species of anurans, which covers frogs and toads in Louisiana. There are several that occur Southwest Louisiana, North Louisiana, that I did not include here. And I also left out a few that are confined to the Florida parishes north of the lake, which is a completely different biome in itself. So there's actually quite a few species of amphibians that occur north of the lake that don't occur here. I've included some, but not all, to kind of keep it a little simple here. So frogs and toads morphologically look very similar. They have the same body shape, longer, stronger hind legs than the front. Frogs typically will have smoother skin. There are exceptions. Most toads have warty skins, and there's exceptions there. There are different families of toads. There's different families of frogs. So we'll try to keep it a little bit simple here. So the family Bufonidae has your true toads, which includes 5 species, 2 in our area, and they do have very warty skin. And there are 2 giant glands that sit behind the eye. There's a called parotid glands, and they do secrete a white milky toxin. So some of you, including myself, may have dogs or cats that go out in the yard and fetch a toad, and they come back disoriented, foaming at the mouth. This is because they're actually getting high on the toad's toxin, which we can touch up a little bit more in a few slides here. But in general, toads are a little more weak when it comes to their hind leg strength because they don't have to make a really quick getaway. Most predators will get a mouthful of that and let them go pretty quickly, versus frogs, which have the ability to escape much further, cover much further distance in a short amount of time, 1 or 2 leaps and they're gone. Toads don't also have to escape to water. They're a little more terrestrial, again, depending on what species. And I don't know where this started. Don't ask. I have no idea where it came from. But toads don't cause warts. Okay, you can handle toads, but wash your hands after handling any amphibian, because whether they're poisonous or not, you can harm the animal. You don't know what the oils and what you got on your hands. So handling an animal with permeable skin, especially frogs versus toads, you can actually harm the frog in question if you're not handling it with clean hands or gloves or something of that nature. But you will not get toads. I mean, you won't get warts if you handle toads. So, what's poisonous and what's venomous, right? That these names are used pretty interchangeably by the planet's vast amount of people. But there's little differences, and some people may say it's splitting hairs. That's fine. But when we're talking about poisonous animals such as toads, they secrete their toxin through the skin. I mentioned the parotid glands, but they also have the warts, as you call them, all over their body. Most toads, if they're extremely agitated, they'll secrete the white silky fluid from these glands. Okay, that's poisonous. Venomous is a little different, and when we're talking about venomous animals, we're kind of lumping things together like pit vipers, which include rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, copperheads. Those are all venomous, and they're called pit vipers because behind the thermoreceptors sits two large venom glands on each side of the face. So they store the venom in these glands, and then once they strike, depending on if it's a dry, most venomous snakes will actually dry bite. So there's no venom induced. They kind of want to save that. If you get a rattlesnake, it's going to want to take down, let's say, a young rabbit. It's got to store up that venom, and it really doesn't want to waste it on you, but they will. So some of those snakes are venomous. Other examples of venomous animals: bees, wasps, some ants possess retractable stingers. Not all, but those are stings. Those are venom. Those are venomous animals, for an example, versus poisonous. Then you've got poisonous plants. So the bottom line comes down. It's kind of silly, but I like to say this: if the animal bites you and you get a negative reaction, then it's going to be venomous. And if you bite it and you get sick, then it's poisonous. And there's wiggle room there for a few things. I'm not going to go into that. But by and large, a toad bites you, nothing happens. You bite a toad, you'll be sorry. And in some areas, people are licking toads to the point where it's actually a problem. This, I think, started in Australia, but now, people in Florida, Colorado, it's an issue. And the toad poison possesses 5-MeO-DMT, which I failed chemistry about as bad as you can fail it. So don't even ask me what that is. It's a psychedelic chemical. That's all I know. People have figured this out. Maybe it goes back to what's her face that kissed the frog and it turned into a prince. Maybe she was having one of these episodes and she thought it was a prince. So yeah, there's people out there licking toads, getting high, man. I don't really know who the first person was to discover that. Gotta be pretty hard up for a good time. I ain't doing that. So let's look at habitat examples. I've got several slides here, and I kind of want y'all to pay attention to look for a common theme here. And if you notice continuity in the photos, what is the most common denominator in all of these photos? You can put it in the chat later, it's fine, but we're looking for one element in all these photos. This is actually from South Point, which is part of Bayou Sauvage out near Irish Bayou in New Orleans East. This is not in Southeast Louisiana, but I used it anyway. This is Bayou Vermilion in Lower Lafayette Parish. City Park here in New Orleans. This is on the North Shore at Bogachita State Park. This is a Tupelo and cypress swamp, in case you can't tell. And then we have Bayou Signet on the West Bank. Another picture from Southwest Louisiana. This is Lake Martin in Breaux Bridge. And this picture is cool for a few reasons. This is once again at Bogachita. You'll notice this natural water flow crossing the road there, and they let that open for most of the year until monsoon season comes, and then you can't really drive through it. But for most of the year, it's a really nice spot. You can Walk through it, drive through it. There's lots of wildlife, snakes, dragonflies, frogs, and toads. So keep that slide in mind. We'll come back to that. The general life cycle of frogs and toads, and I say general because this rule does not apply to each species or even each family for that matter. But in general, you've got your adult frog, lays the eggs, then you've got your embryos that develop in the eggs, turn it to a tadpole, and the tadpole gets his little legs going, and oh, we're almost completely metamorphosed, and then he loses the tail and becomes the adult frog. So you can see how frogs get or not displaced, but rather spread out. If you're going to have an egg mass here, this water is constantly flowing, distributing the frogs all throughout the bayou system in the park. So you can have a mass breeding aggregation here of frogs, and then the eggs get washed every which way. And so it's pretty good distribution for the frogs. And so in order to have this, you must have this. That is not me. All right, it sounds like me. It's not me doing that, but this is amplexus, male copulating with the female frog. This is a pair of Cajun chorus frogs in the Atchafalaya Basin during some surveys I was conducting in 2008, I think. Just another pair of Cajun chorus frogs in amplexus. This picture makes them look a lot bigger than they are. They're just over an inch, so they're not a very large species. And I've got a funny story with this particular species coming up. So here's an egg mass, a typical egg mass for your usual egg laying and urines, which covers your typical frog foods. This is a frog in the genus Lithobates. Don't know which one it is, but most of your Lithobates species are pretty closely related, and the egg masses are similar. I do not have any photos of tadpoles. I think I've got one in here somewhere. But this is a newly metamorphosed Cope's gray tree frog from St. Mary Parish. And it's not a great example, but it's the only one I've got. And the bottom right photo, you can just barely see this stub on the back side of the animal where the tail was. This will reduce with age, but that's the closest example I've got. And I just don't come across them very often. So on to the species. We'll start with toads. Two species of true toads in the family Bufonidae south of Lake Pontchartrain. Fowler's toad is one that historically was probably statewide. There's a massive decline in southwest and south central Louisiana, most notably in Lafayette. There's still a small population there, but there was a drought that hit Lafayette years ago, and it kind of wiped out this species. And as a result, hognose snakes largely disappeared from the Lafayette area because hognose snakes feed almost entirely on toads. They're built for consuming toads. They have two fangs in the rear of their mouth. They open their mouth really wide like every other snake to swallow it. And toads, in self-defense, will puff themselves up very large to make things difficult for a would-be predator. But the hognose snake possessing those two fangs in the rear will deflate the toad and allow it to consume it. That snake is pretty much gone in a lot of areas. So that's directly related to the Fowler's toad disappearing. Whoops. But I've embedded some sound files with each species here to play, and this one is playing. Yeah, that one is. That's awesome. Well, okay, this toad evidently we're not going to hear. I don't know. This toad disappeared from the New Orleans area probably around the 50s. It's no longer here. Super common north of the lake, central Louisiana, and points northward, but they've really started to decline. The further south you go, the closest to the coast you get. And they're polymorphic. There's 3 examples here. You've got your modeled one to the upper left. A typical individual singing with its throat distended here at the top right, and then a really nice red individual from the Atchafalaya Basin. More common here is Gulf Coast toad, very common in the southern portion of the state, and by pure numbers is probably the most common toad we've got. And during the spring, summer, or you know what? I mean, it's December. It's still warm enough. They'll sing this time of year. And most of you have probably heard this deep, long trill. Yep, this is the most common toad you'll see sitting in your driveway, hunting under porch lights. They love grabbing cockroaches and other insects that are nocturnal. So those are the two toads that we've got, the two that belong to Buffonity, the true toad family. Anyway. So moving along to true frogs. The first group is the cricket frog complex, and it's a little confusing. So currently, we've got Blanchard's cricket frog, which is statewide. Again, another super polymorphic individual. Look at the two at the top of the same species, and then they can look anything in between. They can be completely gray. There's really no two that look alike. Then there's southern cricket frog, which only occurs north of Lake Pontchartrain. And I have decided not to include eastern cricket frog because it looks the same, it sounds the same, used to be the same. They just recently decided to split that off. So it looks and sounds similar to Blanchard's. I don't even know how to separate the two besides maybe running DNA, and then there might be some kind of slight song difference. I couldn't tell you. I've excluded that one. But let's listen to Blanchard's cricket frog, and you can pretty much hear these guys anywhere where there's ponds. A pond system, go drive through City Park or Jean Lafitte. It's the most common frog you'll hear singing. Southern cricket frog, once you cross the lake, they're both there. And being that they're both polymorphic and they look the same, you really got to go on sound. And the song is similar, but not enough to confuse them, in my opinion. The Southern cricket frog has a little more disjunctive cadence to it. It's a little more broken up. So it's a pretty noticeable difference once you hear the two enough. And then, like I said, you don't have to worry about finding both of them together unless you're in the Florida parishes. Spring peeper. Now that it's December, these guys are breeding because they actually breed exclusively in the winter in Louisiana or the South in general. In all species of in the genus Pseudacris, that holds true. But this is the frog that you hear in every movie. It doesn't matter what continent the movie's supposed to be on. There's always peepers. Large choruses can be deafening. The body color can vary a little bit in these guys. It also depends on activity. There's some green tree frogs that will be chocolate colored if they're kind of in a proper state. But most of them are going to be a kind of a copper color, or especially this nice reddish color here, and they will almost always invariably have this little X on their backside, which is where the specific name came from, crucifer. Its closest relative is Cajun chorus frog, and this frog was formerly known as upland chorus frog until this complex underwent an overhaul in, I think, like April of 2008. They were divided into 6 species from 1, I think. So the one that's in Louisiana now is Pseudacris phocetii. They gave it the name Cajun chorus frog because it's the only chorus frog that occurs in the state. It also gets to East Texas, South Arkansas, and Western Mississippi. As I mentioned, this species breeds in wintertime too, and their song sounds like someone running their fingers slowly across like a plastic comb. While working at the Wetland Center, I had gone out. My assignment one day was to get photos of this species, and so that was my day. I had to go out to the Atchafalaya Basin and find a bunch of these individuals and get as many photos of different specimens as I could. And getting back to the office, a coworker of mine passed me in the hallway, and he had asked where I was, and I told him I was in the basin getting photos of Cajun chorus frogs. Or I just said chorus frog, and he's the one that said, "Oh, Cajun chorus frogs, huh?" And being in Lafayette, I thought he was being sarcastic, so I said, "Yes, smart ass, Cajun chorus frog." I get back to my office, and there's an email waiting that this had just been split and renamed to Cajun chorus frog. I was under the assumption it was still upland, so he was right, and I was being not so friendly. All right, tree frogs, I think, are still currently in the genus Hyla. Like last week, it was Dryophytes, and then I see some people still using Hyla, so I've gone with Hyla for here on out for the tree frogs until otherwise. So, gray tree frog. There are two species of gray tree frog in Louisiana: Copes, which is statewide, and then there's Eastern or common gray tree frog, which is really kind of confined to Western Louisiana, and even then, just small patches. The problem is the two species are identical. Morphologically, you cannot tell them apart. They come in a variety of colors, as you can see from these photos. Most are going to be that nice gray, but they can be brownish, and they can be that greenish, then they can be brown and green, and so forth. So they're very nicely patterned. But the one at the bottom right with the throat patch extended, you can just see that the inner webbing of the hind legs is yellow. And this is important because there's also bird voice tree frog, which comes in gray. And then there's squirrel tree frog, which comes in gray. And then you got gray tree frog that can come in green. So it can be confusing for someone starting out. The two gray tree frogs can only be distinguished outside of range by voice. And then common gray tree frog is a tetraploid. So they've got, there's more chromosomes in one species than the other. And I don't know if I'm going to get this to play either. What's going on? So my apologies. All of these recordings were working about 14 minutes ago. Cope's gray tree frog has a trill. It's like a short blast of a police whistle trill. And it sure would be nice to get this thing to play, but it's just not going to do it. All right, moving right along. This is going to work, I see. Green tree frog, probably the most familiar. But again, we've got other tree frogs that come in green. So green tree frog being green most of the time, it's got a really nice white racing stripe from the head back down to the vent, which is really strongly pronounced in this species and not in others that are very similar. This is a full chorus from Marrero. So in the suburbs, this is actually going to be your most common tree frog that will come to your porch, sit on your glass sliding doors, hunt the porch lights at night. But caution to the wind again. There are other frogs that look very similar, but this is the most abundant in suburbs. Bird voice tree frog has a very interesting range in the state, and I don't know how well y'all can see that map, but they occur in northwest Louisiana, and then north central, and then northeast, then central, and then southeast. And there's just these major gaps. So it's pretty interesting, the spaces where these frogs are absent. In this bottom photo here, you'll see what I'm talking about, where in the gray tree frog, look here, that yellow in the inner thighs. And bird voiced, it's greenish. Okay, so you can, even if the two individuals look identical, which they can, you can readily tell them apart if they're not singing by examining the hind legs there. And they come in gray. This nice individual from Jean Lafitte right here, and then this lichen colored individual from Abita Springs, and then again the green from Jean Lafitte. Squirrel tree frog. Now look at that one at the top left. You see that looks just like green tree frog, doesn't it? Pretty close. Not a rule of thumb, but this is what I've learned to use over the years. And this is not scientific, but the face for squirrel tree frog is a little more compact. Not squished, but I don't want to use the word cute. All right, just not using it. But you can see how variable they are. So you can have a green squirrel tree frog sitting right next to a green tree frog, sitting right next to a green gray tree frog, and so on. This individual here from Lafayette, gray with the modeling, that can be really confusing, especially like this individual. I'd flip the log and it's cold. It was like December. The frog wasn't moving much. Is that the animal's true color, or does he need to get warmed up? I don't know. Then right next to this one was this one. So they're super variable, but their songs sound completely different than green tree frogs. Barking tree frog, this one is seriously restricted to just the Florida parishes. I've only seen it a handful of times. I've never gotten sound recordings. I do have one here from someone else, and this thing's not going to play. So now I get to make the noises with my mouth. Barking tree frogs sound like dunk, 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 dunk. I mean, exactly like that. I might as well be a barking tree frog. This individual was actually singing here in the photo. This was in Abita Springs at some kind of, and then the other two from Bogachita. They're not quite as polymorphic as some of the other tree frogs. It's the largest native tree frog that we have in Louisiana. And let's see if I can get this thing. It's just not going to play. Okay, well, now this is actually the largest species of tree frog we have in Louisiana, but it's introduced. It's Cuban tree frog, and so far they've been recorded from Orleans, Jefferson, and St. Tammany parishes only. And I think the first state record was written up and published in 2018, or maybe no, before that. I think 2013, sometime around before I moved back to New Orleans, which was 2014. They're established on the fly behind Audubon Zoo, so they're hanging out in those little pavilions along the river. I found them in my backyard, and it's a real bummer that some of these things aren't playing. I can't tell you how. But this is not a good species to have. We have a few introduced species in Louisiana of amphibians and reptiles alike that really kind of just slide into an already existing niche with no negative consequences for our native species. This is not one. This is a very large, very competitive frog. They will eat our native tree frog species, especially some of the smaller ones. And I read recently that they can cause short circuits in electrical boxes, because in colder weather, you get, a ton of them just jammed into these boxes, and they short circuit things. And it's just, it's not good. And so if anyone thinks that they have Cuban tree frogs around, it would be best to get a photo and then have that photo verified, and then we can, take further steps to document specimens and so forth. A colleague of mine in Lafayette is collecting coordinates for anyone that has Cuban tree frogs in the state. All right, now the next two are also introduced species. This is greenhouse frog. So the genus Eleutherodactylus is largely neotropical. There's several species south of the border. You get into Mexico, like West Texas has a few. You get into Mexico, and then in the tropics, it goes nuts. So in Louisiana, we only have two Eleutherodactylus, and this is what I was talking about when an introduced species kind of makes its way into a niche of an already existing species. These guys literally coexist with eastern narrowmouth toads and have shown no decline in the latter. There seems to be very little competition, and they're both thriving. And this species was first introduced into the U.S. in '75. And I think the first Louisiana record was probably like 10 years later in '85, thereabouts. These frogs don't have the tadpole stage. Everything in this genus, Eleutherodactylus, they don't go through the full cycle. They're actually, the neonates hatch straight from eggs. So they bypass that whole tadpole stage. And their habitat is in pots. Like if you have a lot of potted plants in your garden or your yard, you go out and you move stuff around, you see little tiny frogs jumping an incredible distance. That's them. They really prefer human dwellings. They live in gardens, alleyways, places you really wouldn't think frogs would be. This is the stronghold for them. And they eat termites. They eat a lot of other small arthropods. And some of you may even know this song. Very close relative is Rio Grande chirping frog, same genus, Eleutherodactylus. This species was introduced into Louisiana in Shreveport. So the first state record was from Dr. Mac Hardy from LSU Shreveport in '98. And since then, there were populations discovered in Baton Rouge and Lafayette, and it's really kind of about it. Unfortunately, the guy who found the populations in Baton Rouge did not publish. So no pun intended, a buddy of mine and I kind of leapfrogged him and published our population from Broussard, Louisiana, which is in southern Lafayette Parish, in 2008. And so that was on paper the second state record because the Baton Rouge frogs weren't recognized. Another one, I mean, who knows what this frog sounds like, right? If you didn't know it was there. So I'd already been living in Broussard for 4 years, and I was hearing this and hearing it, and finally, so finding these guys in Broussard was kind of like, wow, man. I mean, I know that sound. I couldn't place it because I had heard these frogs in South Texas along the Mexico border years before and just didn't put two and two together. But they're living side by side with the previous species, greenhouse frog, in certain areas. In areas of Lafayette and Broussard, you'll get both species of Eleutherodactylus in the yard. And they've not really, this species has not expanded very much considering what greenhouse frog has done. And I don't have any explanation for that. But they seem to be confined to the parishes Lafayette, St. Martin, East Baton Rouge, Rapides, Calcasieu, and East Feliciana. Now, not true toads, but they have toad in the name. This is eastern narrowmouth toad. It's the only member of the Gastrophryne genus in Louisiana, and one of only 3 in the U.S. But you can see that they're about the same size. They have the kind of same body structure as Eleutherodactylus, and so this is the species I was telling you that that coincides. That they live side by side with the two Eleutherodactylus, and they really don't have any issues. You can flip pieces of tin, particle board, plywood, whatever. It's just kind of laying around, and oftentimes you'll have both underneath the same board. And these toads breed in temporal pools, so you get some really strong, heavy summer storms, and your yard floods. You're probably going to have this. So kind of similar to a nasally sheep. And actually, there's a sheep frog, which is a close relative. It's found further out west. Now on to true frogs. genus Lithobates, formerly the genus Rana. That was another thing that was changed in 2008. They had kept the old world clade of frogs. Water frogs is the family. So Europe got to keep the Rana. Everything in the U.S. was changed to Lithobates. But now there's people that want to revert that, and you know what? We're sticking with Lithobates for right now. Southern leopard frog, you can see where it gets its name from. Its contour is covered with spots like a leopard. They breed year round. You can hear them singing 12 months out of the year, with the exception of freezing conditions. And I ran a frog and toad survey route in St. Mary Parish, which the latter half of my route was completely nothing but crawfish ponds. And so the numbers of these guys was always pretty stunning. Oh my, okay, this one's not going to play either. So, okay, this is what we're going to do. At the end of the talk, y'all can shoot us emails. I'll be happy to share sounds of any of these frogs or give you links, because it's really kind of disappointing that some of these recordings aren't playing, because a lot of these people are like, oh, that's what that is. And if we get the pig frog and that slide's not working, this computer might get broke. This one's not going to play either. Green frog was formerly known as Lithobates clamitans, which was bronze frog. It was a subspecies, restricted to the southern U.S. As you can see, these are two good examples that came from Louisiana. They're a really nice bronzy brown, whereas the populations up north are, like the name implies, green. So with all the new DNA work they're doing, they decided that the subspecies were no longer valid for a lot of these things, and so they removed them. So now bronze frog is just green frog, and it is one of the more common water frogs, like leopard frog, that we have. And their song, this is really one you'll need to check out. Anyone that's walked through like Jean Lafitte Park on the West Bank, you've heard these. It's like a loose banjo string. Dum, dum, dum. See, when it comes out of my mouth, it sounds just like the barking frog I tried to do. I'm not selling my sounds that come out of my mouth anyway. Oh my God, pig frog's not going to work. Pig frog, all right. It sounds, a lot of people actually, oh, you heard that alligator? They and you can picture it being an alligator. I understand. But this is a very large frog. It comes in a close second to bullfrog, and they're very closely related. And there's some stages of their life where if you don't have the frog in hand, you just can't separate the two. I mean, you've got to really kind of look at the amount of webbing on the hind feet to separate the two, or the song, which we're not going to hear here. They'll sing year round too. Actually had them singing at Recovery Road last week. They're also harvested for meat, the rear legs, for fried frog legs. And they are nearly identical to American bullfrog. And it's a good thing this thing's not going to play, because I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of bullfrog. But some of the old Cajuns call them "Orolon" because of the song, the sound. Here I go again. Orolon, orolon, orolon. So adult females can reach over 7 inches, not really counting legs. This is another one that will breed 12 months out of the year, warm, cold, rainy, wet. And since this was like an extra slide I had in here, which is not really fair to play, since like half of the frog recordings didn't play. But if anyone wants to play along, go ahead and type in a guess here. You don't have to say specifically what you think it is, but is this a frog or a toad? Terry, yes, females are larger than males in most species. Oh, and Terry, by the way, that Eastern Narrowmouth toad recording was with you and Glenn Osset in St. Bernard Parish a few years ago. All right, what is this? Come on, man. I don't hear anything on this. There we go. All right, that was another 43 seconds burnt there. Anyone want to guess? Frog, toad, none of the above? I'm going to sit here and wait till someone types something. Eric Guidry, you on the line? You want to take a guess? Everyone's sweet and sleeping. Everyone got annoyed that none of the sounds were working on the left. This is actually not a frog or a toad. Ah, the things in my backyard that we talked about. Yeah, this is northern mole cricket, and it's probably the most commonly misidentified thing as a toad. Mole cricket. I got into it with my ex-wife. It took years for me. Like, what do you do? Like, just go dig it up out of the ground? It's really hard, but I mean, it does kind of sound like a. It sounds like a toad. I couldn't tell you which toad it sounds like because I know all the toads. But yeah, this is northern mole cricket. We have 3 species in Louisiana. Terry, you said you had a mole cricket problem in your yard. You couldn't get them to sing? Or your sound files wouldn't work like this thing. This is crazy. Let me see. I wonder if. I really wanted to play Pig Frog for y'all. See if I can find one online. I don't even know if y'all will be able to hear it if I play something. Can y'all hear that? Okay. All right. Well, y'all's assignment is to get off of this and go look up Pig Frog and tell me if you've heard that before. And if you've heard people say that that's alligators making that sound, because do frogs or toads predate animals or geckos? Some will, especially with the introduction of Cuban tree frog. They will pretty much eat anything that they can get their mouth on. As far as the other things go, it would have to be circumstantial. A green tree frog or a squirrel tree frog is not going to take anything as large as an anole. So it would have to be one of the larger species. I wouldn't put it past a bullfrog or a pig frog either. Let's see. I lost the chat. Did we have any other questions? Well, the lack of sound really kind of threw me for a loop there. So we finished early, but Terry is asking if we can get a copy of the slideshow. I think Stacia can answer that question.
That's really dependent on what you would like to do, James.
Oh yeah, you can have this thing, especially the slides that don't play. Yeah, you can have that all day long. Terry, if you would like, if you get a copy of this, I could send it to you directly. And if it doesn't work, then I can send you like individual sound files of any species you want. The one you said is not a true frog or a true toad. What is it then? You're probably talking about Eastern narrowmouth toad. It is, it's in the family Microhylidae, which is in its own family. So they are literally just called narrowmouth toads. Yeah. Bigfoot is another true toad, which I did not include in here because they're super rare in Louisiana. In fact, one species is threatened, and I've never seen them in Louisiana, so they're super hard to find. What are the teeny tiny ones you've pointed out on bird trips? Those are Blanchard's cricket frogs, especially if you're talking about when we were in for the St. Bernard Parish Bird Fest. Those were all Blanchard's cricket frogs. Yep. Oh, you're taking years off my life, huh? Good on you, Aaron. My apologies to everyone for some of these slides not working. They were literally working this morning before we started this thing. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a boombox next time I do this, and I'm just going to play it into the speaker of the computer. Thanks for coming, Terry. Thanks, Carrie.
All right. Thank
Okay,
you very
I
much,
don't.
James.
Yeah,
Huh?
I don't see any more questions, James. So once again, thank you for the awesome webinar today with the fraud calls. If
Yeah,
you
too
have
bad.
any other questions or if you want a copy of James's slides, please email us at education@nola.gov and we'll get that to you. James, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I sure don't. If anyone's interested in getting involved in herping, you can look up the Louisiana Amphibian and Reptile Enthusiast Group. I think they have a Facebook page. They're directly online, and it's run by Brad Glorioso with the USGS National Wetland and Aquatic Center in Lafayette. They do field trips all over the state. Bones is a good guy. You know, he's been doing this a long time, and so he's actually got a website too, which I can provide to anyone that wants it, and it's got all the species native and introduced to the state.
Okay. Um, if you want to be included on our mailing list, you can also email us at education@nola.gov. You can also follow us on our social media websites. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as @NOLA Mosquito. And with that, I just want to thank everyone again for coming and everyone have a great day.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank y'all.